We rambled around and eventually came up with 3 definite statements. Our first is that people use technology more around a visit than on a visit, and that this kind of vision of the mobile in-gallery information experience is still really evolving. Related to that point, number 2 is that QR codes really don't work. People don't really download the QR code tool, so it just doesn't really work. And then number 3, we talked about, we gave examples of how using more analog and more natural approaches to interpreting art really helps people engage. And so if you're using digital, you have to always try to bear in mind combining that with more natural and conversational methods. So, yeah, that's it.
That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move to this group at the front here.
Right, our question is, what are the barriers and challenges to using digital technology in galleries? One of the ones that came up was that equipment is quite often stolen and damaged, so the physical equipment that you have in the galleries, there might not be people there to be able to keep an eye on it properly, and the equipment itself gets damaged. The other big thing we had was the disconnect between the digital screen and the object. How often an exhibition, when you have the monitor there, it will form a barrier between the artwork or the exhibition and the device itself. And the other main thing was in terms of funding, there's quite often funding for technology, but not the infrastructure that supports it, like to create appropriate content using that technology. That's it.
Thanks very much.
So we were asked the question, why are you using digital technology and platforms? And the core point was because it enables interaction with audiences, and it does that in different ways. So one is when you're commissioning contemporary artists, they may well be using digital technology anyway, and quite a number of them are using it to enable interaction within their work. Learning projects use online platforms quite often to enable public participation. Other examples were for additional space, and you don't have a collection or you don't have a venue space to show commissions. Also sometimes to invite people to submit work or be part of the conversation. And then the other large way was marketing. Often to bring people back to a physical venue to see the actual objects, and also to engage audiences in conversations. So one of the discussions that was around getting audiences back, there were some really nice points raised around kind of some sticking points in mindset, really, around museums and galleries, and how digital demands that you are very generous and fairly relaxed about sharing. And it's an exceedingly different way of thinking than is the tradition of places that have collections or places that are venues orientated around the original object. So a point was brought up about the kind of high culture, that some museums and collections and galleries are very concerned that digital, or they talk about digital as kind of an add-on, or what are we going to do about digital? And there's a question raised about, is that just part of the kind of historical character there is of sort of high culture being a bit suspicious and unsure about new things or different ways of thinking about stuff?
Okay, and our questions were, how are you using digital technologies and platforms, and what are our experiences? So quite sort of broad set of questions, and we had quite a wide-ranging, organic, nebulous discussion, which didn't resolve itself into deciding on 3 points democratically as a group. So I'll try and pull out some of the interesting examples that were covered. I think we spoke a bit about, you know, massive amount of ambition and goodwill in the creative sector to use digital as a tool, but really, you know, realistically, quite a massive deficit in terms of expertise, inability to pay the kind of salaries that bring in kind of cutting-edge digital knowledge into the sector and how that can be an impediment. Beth spoke about, there's often this kind of anxiety, everything we do has to be digitally excellent. We're always looking at kind of Google or these other interfaces. And actually, we can be more relaxed about building platforms to the level of what we want to achieve rather than trying to reach beyond our means and overstretch to quite tragic effect. Was there anything else that anybody particularly wanted to throw in, or because otherwise I'll just come back to very quickly. We're talking about, from my perspective, I work for one of the Arts Council funded bridge organisations, and we try and interact a lot with teachers and with young people as well. And I think very often we overestimate the expertise, the kind of digital savvy, and the time that teachers have to engage with our sector through digital. And probably it's a common experience that anybody emailing teachers get email. You get messages back at all kinds of crazy times of night, and they're kind of snatching their communication with us without time to think. But we also make these massive, sometimes unhelpful assumptions about the level of knowledge and ability that young people have with digital, but I think that's quite poorly understood as a sector, and our ability to engage with young people through the mediums that they're utilising, not always very kind of detailed or successful in my experience.
Thanks very much. Just pass on to the other group at the back, and then we'll have one more at the front.
Again, I don't think we came up with 3 succinct answers here, but we are...
Try.
Yeah, we're looking at what our experiences of digital technology in galleries, or what are our audience's experiences of digital technology in galleries. So we think maybe hesitancy would be one, which could be mediated through human interaction with visitor experience assistants or with staff or information staff. We talked about participatory experiences, about play, pressing buttons, maybe making films off-site and then that are screened in the gallery, making animations at home, which are then screened on our website or in the gallery. That kind of participatory experience. We thought it might personalize the experience through social media, like tweeting, sharing, taking your photograph, uploading it. And there might be an interesting transfer of authority around the participation, where we're kind of enabling people to create content. And we think that maybe it could be a singular experience. If you're interacting with the technology, could be a detrimental thing. And as well, we talked about a sort of a disconnect between, I guess, reality and the digital world.
Okay, thanks. And finally, the group at the front.
I've taken the liberty of trying to cram all of our points into 3 groups because we went through a lot of topics. So I've grouped one under trying to keep up with the speed of the development of the technology and future-proofing in your projects. I mean, that covers things like investment in equipment and things like that, and trying to keep up with training and things like that with what's changing in such a rapid pace. I've put another category of staff confidence, but this really covered an awful lot of things that we talked about within the organisation, of trying to train staff again, trying to get people from out with digital departments, or if you don't have digital staff, it's getting staff from completely different areas to try to think digitally. And we talked a bit about kind of visitor service staff being confident and having tools to approach visitors and to show them what is possible within the gallery space. And we have another one then that I put down as restraints of process, but that covered things because money obviously comes up straight away, but we talked a bit about different organizations sort of battling their various superiors or processes. We talked a bit about councils and smaller organizations as well, trying to deal with procurement and fundraising and costs of all these things. We also then talked a little bit about some stuff that wasn't, I felt, a barrier, but a reason to possibly reconsider your digital projects. And we talked a bit about whether or not digital is suitable for all audiences, that some people may not want that. And we talked a bit about digital potentially disrupting people's gallery visits. So there's other things to consider, and I shouldn't say that because that's my job.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a lot in there, but there's some common points there, I think, particularly about the relationship between the real and the virtual, the constraints, the idea of the digital as a barrier potentially to engagement, but also, obviously, the other side of that as a possibility for personalizing and customizing your relationship, and also extending the experience. If it starts in the gallery, it can be extended on and then potentially even brought back in again, as Ruth illustrated with the fantastic tweet project. So quite a lot in there. I suspect there are some questions around those as well as points. What I'd like you to do now is, again, slightly reconfigure yourselves physically, but only just by turning your chair to face the tables. If the speakers could join us up on the panel. And we'll now have some question and answers between the panel and the audience, also known as a conversation. Anyone who's got a burning question, either in response to the excellent presentations earlier or coming out perhaps of the conversations you've just had, now's your time.
Hello, I'm Jen Ridding, Learning and Access at the Barber Institute, which is at the University of Birmingham. It's not really a question, it's just throwing something out there that we've just touched upon. Thinking about generational things, intergenerational things. Is digital just for young people? Is it all about the next generation who have grown up with digital rather than us who remember pre-digital? And also thinking about our audiences who perhaps surprisingly still don't have digital in their lives. So when we were talking in our little groups, my parents came to mind. My dad still buys CDs. They don't have tablets. They don't social network. They interact with culture, but digital isn't part of their lives. And I just wondered if anyone had done any work around this or had any opinions, really.
When we had the iPads out on for our Gerhard Richter exhibition, the aim was to engage young people, and that actually increased our youth engagement, our audience. But the surprising one was the over 60s and how many engaged with that device. So this was a little conversation that we had in our group as well about engaging sort of that age range. And actually the percentage wasn't far off our youth engagement audience. So I think that was quite significant. And then going on about audiences that don't have digital in their lives, that's actually me. I don't have a computer. I don't, and it's quite ironic that I'm delivering these projects, but I don't actually have digital in my life. I actually have the ideas, and I go to the people that know how to do it and explain what I want. They come back and say, you can't do it. And I say, no, but why? Why can't we do it? Let's just do it. And I think part of that ignorance sort of helps them understand what I want, and then they go away and achieve it for me. So I'm actually one of those non-IT people that you were talking about, but I still have that interest in that engagement.
Lisa, so if digital isn't part of your life, how do you feel when you go to something and they've woven digital into it, or everything's about the digital element? I'm just wondering how that makes you feel when you're not in your work mode and you're visiting something. Do you feel it intrudes, or can you filter it out?
I look at it as a game. So I see it more as a game, and that fits quite well with IT and gaming and how it sort of crosses over into learning and how we engage. And if I see it as a game and something's there for me to engage with, let's work it out, it's a problem. And so I see it as a solution, if you see what I mean. So that's how I approach it.
I just wanted to very quickly chip in with John. Said earlier about how sometimes assumptions are made about the younger generation and their skills, and we've been doing a lot of research at the moment as part of Connecting Collections, and one of the key things that, yes, the mechanics absolutely, they know how to work an iPad now. They understand those mechanics, but there's still, it feels to me, there's still a very big gap when it comes to that more formal side, to children and young people researching and understanding how to use sources, how to find sources, how to use them, where the limits are. There's a nervousness, understandably, about copyright and licensing from our sector when it comes to digital stuff, but I think schools are missing a trick and we're missing a trick because we're not actually teaching them about that. And if you explain that, they're very open to it. So I think there is a missing layer of skills. There's a sort of naivety because it falls between the gaps in the different subjects. There isn't any one subject that looks at that, at how to navigate your way through this knowledge and this content in a useful way.
Yes, I think that's been consistently an issue with this technology, and even prior to this, if you look at media education programs and visual literacy and critical literacy, those things have consistently been behind the step with how we engage with this media. So we've talked about the idea of looking behind the screen rather than looking at the screen, and I think that's really essential, with all of the audiences we're engaging with particularly with young people who are a generation of digital consumers, and it's so important for them to be digital critics and producers as well, and through digital production and conversations about the digital, they will acquire that criticality, but I think it's just as important to have those moments to talk about that as it is to introduce them to and let them play with the gadgets.
Yes, there's also, I think you could, if you just take the digital question out of that question and think about when certain groups of people are excluded, and I think the thing that people find exciting about digital technologies is that we kind of stick a label on it and say this is a connecting thing, this is a bridging thing. And I think there are many other ways to do that, and you just have to pay attention to that being the thing that you want to achieve. And then digital should just be part of that as a set of things, rather than, you can't achieve everything through one thing. So it just needs to be part of a kind of set of elements.
Yeah, I'd also say that, if anybody's I think there is a feeling that sometimes digital is going to put somebody off, or it's a huge, it's a huge thing in the room, it changes the space in some way. But I think that digital works best when it actually disappears. So it's about providing something for somebody. But just like, I think Kindle say in their promotional literature, when you're reading on a Kindle, they want the Kindle to disappear and it's just you and the text. And I think that is when digital works best, when it kind of disappears. So it's not about a huge comment. It's not about suddenly we're being digital. It's just that we're providing another avenue or another way for someone to access the information.
I think digital very rarely disappears. I think it is a real kind of a bit of a kind of holy grail, and I think it very rarely happens.
Well, for me, say if I find using Pinterest on an iPad, and for me, Pinterest only works on an iPad. It doesn't work on a phone. It's too small. It doesn't work on my laptop. I'm in the wrong place. So I'm sat in an armchair in a room, and I'm looking at Pinterest, and I'm thinking what my next drawing workshop is going to be about. So I type in 3 words, and I try and make them different words. Not, I don't type in charcoal drawing. I type in drawing, frog, whatever, strange words, and then just let Pinterest take me places. Then technology disappears for me. Then I'm just in a world of images, and my brain's thinking, what am I going to do, and then it disappears. Fair enough.
Have we got another question from the floor?
How do you think we're going to deal with the kind of ever expansion of different social media outlets? So a lot of the presentations were kind of Facebook and Twitter, but essentially there's, especially the younger generation, are using a lot of a diverse range of social media outlets. And as an organisation, I work for Museum Sheffield, we're kind of talking about, should we be on Vine? Should we, we don't really use Instagram, but that's a huge community that we're kind of ignoring. And that I think that's only ever going to increase. So how do we deal with that? And how do we, it's almost like if we solely do something through Facebook, we do exclude quite a few people who aren't Facebook users, who don't have Facebook profiles. So I just wondered what you think of the direction of that and how we deal with that.
So you just adapt fast.
And think about what you're trying to do and who you're trying to reach, because all of those social media settings have their own personalities and their own kind of reasons for being and their own ways of working. And I think if you start off with the content, the art, whatever it is, and start off with the message and start off with thinking about what you want your audience to do, how you want your audience to react, how you want your audience to be involved and to participate, and then think about where to go and meet them, and then adapt.
There's something about sort of honesty as well. Is when something's, when you have genuinely done something or produced something that people want to talk about it, they will talk about it, and they'll use whatever they use to talk about it. That's when the conversation goes outside of your control as well, and that's the thing about it, really, isn't it? That we actually can't control how people are going to be communicating, adapting. We've just got to know what's going on and be ready. But yeah.
And sometimes it's enough to listen and watch. You don't have to have a formal presence. If you make your content portable and allow your audiences to take it wherever they want to take it and have those conversations. Sometimes I feel it's enough to dip in and respond and react and watch and keep an eye on it, but you don't need to have the official channel in every social media setting.
You don't have to do it all.
Yeah, I think it's important, reiterating what Anra says, to think first about what is it you want to achieve and with who and why. And also be mindful that the proliferation of social media platforms, they're not the same. They don't do the same things. So what Instagram is good for is not the same as what Facebook or Twitter are good for. And if you want to have a conversation, Twitter might not be the best place because it isn't actually a conversation. It's a way of proliferating opinions and ideas and spreading thoughts, but it's not actually a conversation. So it's worth asking those questions. So a whole slew of hands went up then. So, Bridget.
Okay. Yes, I think a bigger problem, and I wonder what you think about it, is not so much the proliferation of social networks, but the homogenization. I mean, actually, Vine comes from Twitter, Instagram feeds into Twitter, so perhaps the proliferation is just really an expression of certain groups trying to resist that homogenization. And I actually think one thing that we need to be resisting is increasing corporatization of digital culture. So I wonder if you have thoughts about that.
I'd like to say something. In the group before this session, we were talking about the opportunities afforded by the fact that everyone has a device in their hands, and talking about the fact that one of the problems that we have this idea that digital gives us an explosion of possibilities, when actually, just picking up on what Bridget said, very often what we're doing is that we're being programmed to think in a very thin way and to have very narrow expectations about what these digital technologies can do to us, because Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they need us to behave in a certain way in order for them to be able to operate and make the profits that they make. So we're kind of programmed. We're programmed to think and relate and connect in a certain set of ways. Furtherfield's response to this has been to... We work with a lot of these platforms, but we also pay attention to what's going on in a kind of range of communities, especially in the kind of free and open source software development. So our website is built on Drupal, which is a community open source platform. That helps with future-proofing, by the way. WordPress is also free and open source, which is brilliant. So you're not going to find yourself suddenly not able to use your stuff. But there are kind of social media platforms that are also free and open source. So they're much more free to develop in a way that has a whole load of different kind of motivations behind it. The problem with it is that not everybody is there. And while we are in the situation we are as arts organisations, often having to demonstrate our value through numbers of bums on seats, that the attraction of things like Facebook and Twitter, where suddenly we can announce that we had 500,000 people engaged with this or that, it's a real lure, and it can really distract us from what it is that we're trying to achieve.
I thought also to follow on from that, because we've tried, we use WordPress for the site, and we've tried a few. AccessArt is we're very open to trying things, putting them out, and then just pulling them back and pretending we never thought of that idea. And we've tried a few times, a forum and our own social networking. We had the studio project for a while. We were trying to do it outside Facebook, outside Twitter. We liked the idea of being able to do it outside. It was really, really hard work, and in the end we just dropped them, because even though Facebook does make you behave a certain way, it is a hell of a lot easier to get a group of people following and commenting. And even now we get emails saying, why can't I log into your site with my Facebook account? No matter how much you might pull against it, people do want that conformity as well. So it's an interesting one. I think we could spend a long, long time trying to build other types of communities when it's already been invented somewhere else.
Other questions? Janice?
This has been... Is that on?
Could you say who you are? Sorry, I
I'm sorry, I'm Janice McLaren. I'm head of education and projects at the Photographers Gallery. And I guess, I don't know that this has come up yet, but maybe we're touching on it. The idea about the authority of the gallery or museum, and then the idea of how that authority might or might not be intercepted by people who access our programs, whether physically or digitally, or and really, I guess I'm interested in a kind of response where there's some kind of, if people can suggest ideas around some kind of transparency, but also some kind of openness that museums and galleries can have. And I don't want to say user-generated content, because I think already that designs a relationship whereby people are using a gallery or museum or a program. But I guess I'm really interested in this balancing act of a curated project or program, but something that can also be amorphous and go in places that perhaps the museum or gallery has never expected or thought about or would even feel comfortable with. And and yeah, it's a kind of open and slightly inarticulate question about something it's kind of been playing on a number of staff's minds at the Photographers Gallery.
Is it about giving ownership to someone else?
It's maybe about ownership. It's about how we've been constructed historically as authorities of knowledge and perhaps and as a kind of specialists, perhaps, and that that our audiences or the people who may want to collaborate or participate or visit us may also have authorities that conflict with what that gallery or museum perhaps stands for or is strategically heading towards. Does that, I don't know if that...
It happens.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting when it happens.
If I could give a Tate example, if you don't mind. Recently, and it's absolutely a real live physical example in the gallery as well as the digital example. The recent Late at Tate, that was a collaboration with Warp Records where Jeremy Deller, the work by Jeremy Deller, which I'm embarrassingly forgetting the name of, but somebody will chime up and Acid Brass, thank you, was the starting point for one of our big Late at Tates, and it was a collaboration with Warp Records, a record company that have their own completely independent following, much of which I would say doesn't necessarily cross over with Tate Britain's regular gallery-going audience. And what happened with that was not only did we have an event in the gallery that was unlike most of what happens in this gallery, which was a whole series of interventions, interactions, artist moments, and lots of musical moments throughout the gallery where
audiences were able to experience work in the context of different kinds of musical interventions, some of which they orchestrated themselves as the audience, but it culminated in a fantastic playing of the acid brass by the Furtherfield Brass Band, and that was obviously filmed, and it was tweeted, and it was Instagrammed, and a huge amount of people came, tried to get in. Actually, many of them couldn't get in, and it generated conversation and experiences that were way outside of the control or constraints or orchestration of the gallery, in some cases to the gallery's concern. But actually what it did was set up a set of contexts which a whole range of different audiences then took control of. And that was really interesting and exciting. But it was a physical event as much as the digital sort of generation and regeneration after that made that happen.
Can I just add just to something about what Janice said about the authority of the museum? Charles Esch is heading up the International, which is where 5 or 6 museums across Europe are working together. And I think the grand plan is that they all share collections, that they will all be as one. So there's that, I don't know where it fits with the digital, but there's that thing about the breaking down of the collection, that the collection is not so much held within each individual museum, but it starts to, there was talk of copying Guernica, that you can put it anywhere else. So there's this kind of, how that translates to the digital, I'm sure we'll see, but it's interesting to watch those conversations with that. There's that breakdown of that power.
But I would add that that's 5 institutions that all collectively have a lot of power. So that's not about the kind of... Yeah, sure. Anyway, sorry.
John, I think this may be the last question.
I was just curious about... I have a feeling Anra might have some thoughts about this, but curious for all of you. Where is there excellence or innovation in practice outside of our sector, whether that's kind of corporate or, elsewhere in the education sector or elsewhere generally, that we could learn from, where we should be looking, where perhaps we're not looking at the moment? And if I can tag on to the end, I'm just curious about excellence from our sector or elsewhere, about sort of interacting with schools directly in their own classrooms through interactive whiteboards or such like.
If you take the example of, say, digital collections and how those are presented and discovered, then I'm looking at ASOS. Really, clothes. Look at how clothes are sold, and look at how clothes are discoverable online. Go shopping, and then why are we not doing that with our collection objects? And the technology's there, and I'd suggest, again, it's hard because you need to look at the different sort of communities of interest depending upon what you're trying to do. But something like have you seen the Rookie community? The way that Rookie started off, 14-year-old fashion blogger, she's now turned it into this international happening movement. There's a book, there's all sorts of related digital spin-offs, and the way that it's just a masterclass in capturing an audience of mainly young girls with an interest, a shared interest around the world, giving them all equal status, allowing them the power. And this is from a very personal point of view. My 15-year-old has just set up the Brighton Rookie group, and so she's organising the Brighton meetups. And yeah, it's just wonderful for that age group. So look right outside the sector, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd echo that. One of our great hallelujah moments was a long time ago. So I'm sure if we went back to the site now, it wouldn't have the same impact. But we were sat together in my office and we saw the Absolute Vodka site. I have no idea why we went to the Absolute Vodka site. But at the time, this was 12 years ago, it was the only site we went to that had truly understood that it was a visual medium. And it was so exciting, and we spent a long time on that site, and that was huge for us. I think going outside is definitely the way to do it.
Any other
Final points. Okay, I don't want to eat into your lunch anymore, so I'm just going to take this opportunity to thank very, very much all of our speakers for their fascinating presentations and thought-provoking ideas, and thank you as well for your contributions, for your conversations. Please revisit them in the afternoon sessions and enjoy your lunch and enjoy your visits. Thank you very much.